All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Why Life Science Companies Need a CLM Solution webinar. My name is Brittany Wayne. I am Commercial Counsel here at Licecycle, and I'm here with Chris Stull. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Stull with Magenta Therapeutics. I'm the Director of Legal Affairs and Contracts Counsel at Magenta.
Great, thank you. So just a quick intro about myself and my journey about how I came to Licecycle. It's actually kind of funny. I worked at a healthcare consulting company, and I was like Chris, which he'll explain soon, but I was the sole counsel. It's a global company based out of Framingham in Paris, and so I was the sole attorney for employees in over 5 countries. And so I was pretty swamped, and especially with the different time zones and different databases employees used in different countries, I was given the task of finding a CLM, a Contract Lifecycle Management solution. So I did demos with various providers, and I fell in love with the Licecycle solution. And I had worked at a tech company prior, and I knew I wanted to end back in the technology space. So I love the solution so much, I wanted to use the product and help grow the company too, so I joined. Chris, how about you? How did you hear about Licecycle?
Hi, yes. So I've been in healthcare biotech for about 8 years, both large healthcare, large biotech, and small biotech, and have been in charge of selecting and implementing a number of different contract lifecycle management tools, as well as continuous improvement initiatives across the organizations that I've worked in around the contracting process. So started at Mass General Brigham, formerly Partners Healthcare, was at Biogen for a number of years in a variety of different roles. And then I moved to smaller biotech. I was at Triplet Therapeutics, an Atlas-backed company, and now at Magenta Therapeutics doing similar work.
Great, thank you. That's so interesting, Chris. So how about we dive right into today's agenda? We thought we would go over an overview of what CLM is, the pain point CLM can solve, in particular for life science companies. Then we'll go into use case and exercises, how I myself use the product day in and out, and also how Chris and his company uses Licecycle. And then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end and answer any questions. So first, what is CLM? Well, it's a Contract Lifecycle Management software. If you found this webinar, you're probably already somewhat familiar with what a CLM is, so we won't bore you too much with the details. But basically, your CLM solution should be a central repository for your contracts and help you track those contracts for every stage, from the very beginning, creating the draft or using a template, to negotiating back and forth with red lines and tracking all of the versions, to storing it as in the final agreement stage and being able to sort the agreements by how you want to organize them as a company. Then we will go into how CLM can specifically help life science companies. Now, in general, basically what I already mentioned, contract organization. You can run due diligence, track the volume and nature of the documents. For example, CDAs. I know here at Licecycle, I track the number of CDAs and NDAs, master services agreements, you name it. Life science companies track clinical trial agreements, sponsorship agreements, studies. It also gives commitment insights, so helps you extract key information from every contract and turn static dates and commitment data into actionable insights, which we'll go over more in Chris's use case. But for example, if you need to know when a contract will renew, or when a trial is going to end, or when you need to give notice to another party about anything, you can set that up in your CLM to notify you. And this really saves time and in many cases money too, for those contracts that auto renew. If you don't catch that in time, and you don't want the product anymore, then that's a costly error. Then it can help accelerate deal making, fundraising, and mergers and acquisitions. We have a lot of clients that use CLM for M&A in particular by reviewing key clauses and terms. The main one being assignment. You never want to hold up this huge strategic transaction by needing to ask some of your clients, even just for an NDA, for consent to assign. Those venture capital or PE or other companies that will help your company either go public or become acquired really don't want to see you have to get consent and hold up the deal. You can see other change of control clauses. You can use it to evaluate litigation and patent claims, capture payment terms, and distribution liabilities. And lastly, another example is to de-risk those third-party agreements. We estimate that 75% of biotech contracts exist on third-party paper, which makes sense because when dealing with biotech companies, it's so use case specific that really a general MSA isn't going to cover it. It really has to be, each contract really needs to be tailored to whatever the use case is. And so you can use that CLM to manage that, see maybe as your company goes bigger, that shift of how many of your papers are third-party paper versus your own, etc. So Chris, with that very long summary that I just gave, I'd love to hear about what kind of contracts your team uses while using the CLM and how you use it in general. And I'd also love to hear when you had that eureka moment that you needed a CLM.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brittany. Happy to touch on that. So our use case at Magenta, when I joined the company, we had a number of sources where contracts were held. So we had an existing contract repository, I would say not a true contract lifecycle management tool. We had homegrown SharePoint sites, both within legal and within other departments across the organization, where contracts were stored. And we didn't really have a single source of truth for where we were going to for our contracts library. So that was the main use case, is being able to just find with ease through the use of AI, right, and easy searching functionality, find contracts that we were looking for. The other piece we were looking to solve was kind of the life cycle of the contract, right? The end-to-end process, visibility into the end-to-end contracting processes, from the request to negotiation to then finally getting the document executed and loaded in that single source of truth. So what we were looking for was a tool where we could track the number of requests that were coming in, the type of request, as you mentioned, Brittany, right? Working with a number of different, what I would call maybe standard and then non-standard contracts, right? Your standard CDAs, your standard MSAs. But then, as you mentioned, we have material transfer agreements, clinical trial agreements, sponsored research agreements, so a number of different kind of non-standard contracts. And we know that those take different types, different runways, right, to negotiate those contracts, different timeframes. So wanted to be able to track those and provide visibility to both our stakeholders internally as well as our senior leadership team on where those contracts stood as they went through the negotiation process. And then the final piece was really after the contract was executed, we were looking for some reporting metrics. So how do we track our obligations within those contracts when key contracts were maybe auto-renewing that had financial implications, contracts that included third-party obligations potentially around intellectual property considerations, or publication, for example, in some of our research when certain key things had to be published and reviews had to happen. So tracking those key terms and being able to pull reports from our existing kind of contracts landscape was something we were all looking to solve. And that's when we were kind of using a very manual Excel process before, a manual kind of process where you're searching individually within contracts, reading them, trying to remember which ones had certain obligations to who. looking for a tool to really consolidate all of that. And I think, as you mentioned, in CLM, important, right? So we have various, projects that we would work on as well, whether it's due diligence, fundraising, M&A type activities, where you need to pull reports and be able to do an analysis on what that, what kind of work that would look like internally. And we used to rely a lot on external help, which was a huge cost. So looking for a tool to kind of help consolidate us to be able to do that work internally. And that's when we decided that we really needed. I put together the business case for actually moving from a contract repository format to a true contract lifecycle tool like LinkSquares.
Exactly. That's so amazing to hear. And just to add to that, I know for me, to go off of what you said about visibility into contracts for the entire team, or if you're a one-person team for the whole company, it's so helpful for me in my legal team that I work on, because the sales team, finance team, IT, marketing, all of those groups within the company have contracts. And so they're able to check on the statuses of those agreements. So it really helps remove that stigma of the contract is quote unquote stuck in legal. If they can see, oh, we're waiting on the counterparty to get back to us, that really just helps the rapport and build trust within the whole company as well. I know, and even with saving time and therefore being able to negotiate more quickly, I used to, there's no other choice than to get context on agreement in my email history and in Slack or Microsoft Teams, however, whatever tool you use to communicate with different teams. But I use the activity feed within LinkSquares in particular to communicate internally, and that saves so much time. And also, what I think I forgot to mention earlier is just what a CLM is. It's kind of a broad term, and there's so many vendors, CLM vendors, and that call themselves CLM, and they all are CLM. But I think based on the different tools and offerings that each CLM company offers, it can really vary differently between each vendor. So a CLM can really mean a lot of different things depending on which tool you use. So Chris, back to you. What are your plans for the future with the CLM?
Yeah, no, thanks, Brittany. And I think you raised a great point, right, about having that audit trail of being able to also, save notes around within this tool, right, itself, around why you negotiated or agreed to certain terms. And this goes into really our future plans with CLM. Future plans, right, is to really build out those kind of clause libraries of, when did we have to deviate from our standard terms, right? How often are we deviating from those standard terms? Why are we deviating them? And be able to kind of have that audit trail, build out that clause library, and or make improvements to our templates, right? As we as we mature as a company, or as the market landscape changes within biotech. COVID was a huge change for us all, right, in terms of supply chain demands, and we were getting different terms in our contracts, right, than we did pre-COVID, right? So being able to track those things across vendors, right, different vendors, but that play in the same vertical. So that's one piece, right? We're really looking to kind of build out best-in-class templates, improve our templates, build out clause libraries. The other piece that we're looking at is more of an integration with our NetSuite, right, finance system, to be able to have the documents that we've stored within our CLM also be able to be moved into our NetSuite system, attached to a PO approval, so that approvers for the financial piece can actually look at the documentation attached. That's the latest version that's been approved by legal within LinkSquares. So that's more of a phase 2, phase 3 to track in the future. And I think, as you mentioned, right, kind of third-party paper versus our own templates, just overall being able to track, what kind of third parties, right, are we having to agree to third-party paper with? When are we successful at using our own paper? Try to get out in front of that within the negotiation based on kind of the data that we have in order to expedite the process overall, right? And I think any of that intel that you have in being able to go back right in the tool and help you kind of negotiate for the future just helps streamline the process, and also gives you data to bring to your stakeholders of why we're seeing these various terms, right, being pushed back on and or agreed to. So that's our future state. I think now, right, we have a good single source of truth. We have a good baseline to be able to do that. So that's what we'll be working on over the next, coming months and years.
That's great, and I think an excellent point about as you scale as a team. Like right now, Chris, I know you're the sole counsel, so if you were to go on vacation or something, and someone else came in just to check on the status of things, I'm sure it would be. And speaking from my own past experience too, it's just it's so easy for any company that doesn't have a CLM for different teams to feel like they're kind of left in the dark if one team member is either sick or on vacation or just out for other reasons. To add that clarity and have, like you said, that single source of truth. I also like what you said about the manual entry process. I think you mentioned that you used to use SharePoint, and I did too, and also Excel, and all of these um, metric or manual solutions are great and very helpful, but they're not CLMs, and they're not meant to be CLMs. And there's that saying, good data in, good data out, whereas you can sort through your contracts as long as you enter that correct metadata in as soon as you add that contract into your database. But if just human error, forgets to add the correct piece, whether it be assignment clause, governing law, renewal date, or even which regulation is in place. And that's in particular for life science companies, whereas we know regulations change all the time and are being updated, and where you want to keep your contracts up to date, it could be really tough to just rely on a spreadsheet. That's the word I was thinking of. To use it as a CLM, because it's really just not going to work.
No, that's a great point, Brittany. And if I can just add, right, I think that's one of the things you touched on, right, but automation. So I think as I've been doing this, right, over a number of years, I've seen just the technology in this space advance drastically, right? So even just looking at things like the quality of our contracts, right? We used to have things that were titled maybe magenta scan 1, 2, 3, right? Somebody had manually signed it and scanned it and put it in. And so just actually having a CLM to be able to basically ingest those contracts, put the quality of the contracts, right, to be able to read them, to be able to search for terms within the contract, pull those terms out, have a standard naming convention, which makes it easy to find things. Automating, like I said, the front end on the request piece to be able to track number of requests, where they are, but also on the back end, right, being able to have a CLM, right, integrate with your DocuSign, Adobe Sign, whatever your electronic signature software is, and then be able to have that load into the system in a standard naming convention, with some reviews, right, by somebody like myself in legal, and then have that load that you're staying up to date with, having that single source of truth, that library up to date, without having to manually enter that in. And depending on who's entering the data, right, like you said, the data can go in a number of different ways, right, or mistakes can be made. So you have that AI to help you. You have that automation, which is a huge time save for a team like ourselves, right? So we have a team of 3 legal people, but I'm the only one doing contracts. So we don't have any administrators or contracts managers. So being able to give myself that time back to my day, right, to be able to kind of work on my core of negotiating the contracts and supporting our business, right, with our legal expertise, that saves me a lot of time throughout the week. And I think, as you mentioned, right, if I go out, right, there's a concern around the organization, well, what's gonna happen with things that are in process. Now another member of the team can jump in, see where things were at, see my notes, be able to pick it up and help keep the process moving along while I take vacation, or maybe I'm out unexpectedly. So for a small team like us with limited resources, even though there's an expense up front with investing in your CLM, when you build it out the right way, it's actually, we're seeing cost savings, right, and time savings exponentially, right, because that time is now coming back to us that we've implemented this tool.
Absolutely, especially when the decision is either onboard a CLM or onboard an employee. The cost difference between salary and the CLM is likely going to be pretty different, and then the CLM is just quicker to train and has that AI capability that humans just don't. And what else? I drew a blank. Oh, I remember. Sorry. How often? So at Link Squares, we call our we have customer success managers that help onboard and customize your experience and all of our clients' experiences while using the product. How often do you talk to your customer success manager?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Brittany. So when we were evaluating CLM tools, right, because we have a very small team, we knew we needed some help to kind of get through the implementation. So making sure we had a success team, to help us through the implementation on our vendor of choice, right, was very key. So I speak to our customer success manager once a week. We have standing meetings for 30 minutes. Obviously through the implementation phase, we use those all the time. Now that we're getting more to steady state, we kind of use those as ad hoc when questions come up or when updates are made, for example, or we need to make some changes, we check in. But they've been great, right? They're available for training, helping me train the stakeholders, helping with change management to the business, right? Who's maybe not used to using this, questions that come up. Really good support system to be able to provide for training, for resources, for questions that come up, updates we need to make to the system. So we're in contact pretty regularly, at least once a week.
At least once a week. Wow,
Yeah.
that's great. And when do you reach out to them for kind of specific, have you reached out to them before when changing a process or trying to implement, let's say, for example, a new naming convention?
Yes, yeah. So reach out to them via email, very responsive, right? I would say you always get back typically that day, if not, first thing the next day. If they don't have an answer right away, it's, we're looking into this, or, um, you know, we connect on our weekly call to be able to walk through the updates. So, very responsive, and reach out through email. So I have a dedicated customer success manager, as well as somebody on the technical side that joins as well if there's very kind of IT technical questions that can support new updates to the system, and really explain technically to either our IT team or myself, right, if there's any questions that come up.
That's wonderful. And what are your plans for the future with CLM, with your team and your company, which I know is growing?
Yeah, so continuing to kind of build out the processes within the tool, right? So I think right now we're kind of starting, like I said, maybe in a phased rollout where we're having the stakeholders submit more of a contract request form. We answer key questions. We basically completely automated our CDA process. But I think the goal is to, as we move along, start to continue to automate more of this, right? Maybe our standard MSA, if it's just a services agreement, and we can kind of have them answer questions, guide them to that MSA template, get that out to the third party. Then I'm coming in more when there's just red lines. So that's one piece, right? Also, I think I mentioned the back end signature and approval piece. I'm still involved in the tool a lot, kind of doing those approvals within the tool. But eventually, as we build out and have more approvers in the process, we want to add that in, right? Add in additional approvers, reviewers as we mature as an organization and grow. So those are all things that, as we look as a small company, how we're able to absorb volume as our volume of contracts go up, right? We get further in our trials, we have more sites, whatever it may be, we're able to actually absorb that volume more internally rather than having to rely on outside resources to be able to absorb peaks and valleys kind of in volume, and really automate as much of the process as possible.
That's great. And I'm actually going through something similar, just as the company evolves and even preferences as a legal team and strategies evolve depending on the growth and the situation that the company is in. Creating those templates and asking questions to the drafter can really help change. You can change the way the template is drafted. So I can have, for example, multiple different versions of one master services agreement, but the drafter, by answering certain questions, it'll help guide them to the right template. So having that peace of mind as a legal team that other teams who are sending out the contracts are using the correct version of the contract and the exact right tailored contract as well. Saves so much time down the road, and makes everything so much more efficient.
Definitely.
Now, I think that is it. Now, I'd love to open the floor for some questions. We have time for some Q&A. Okay, some people already submitted some, actually. What are some of the best practices for communicating with your team? I guess I'll go first. I use the activity feed, which is basically what LinkSquares calls basically the chat feature, but there is the activity feed for every single contract. So it's not just in the whole repository. So if I'm working, I can go into a certain contract I'm working on and go at finance person or whichever team member and ask them the question specific to the contract. Sometimes that could be about them asking me about turnaround time. Sometimes it's me asking them about a very specific question, or it's me asking finance if it's been approved, all sorts of things. I use the activity feed because there's, like you said, Chris, one single source of truth. So I'm not going through all these messages and emails and notes, maybe handwritten on my desk. It's all right there. And for anyone that needs context months from now, it'll all be there. Chris, was there anything you wanted to add, or should I go to the next question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll just add on that, I think that, right, we all get a lot of emails, and, the threads, you get a lot of people involved that weigh in. So I think the benefit of the CLM system, right, is being able to tag specific points in the contract, specific sections, and say, hey, relevant reviewer, can you please take a look here and let me know what you think, questions, concerns, and then to be able to kind of get that feedback live in the system, get a notification, right, when somebody has actually done their review, and then go in, and then I can edit the language as we need to, or kind of work on that, and have it tracked within the system, and see progress that we've made, or even the negotiation history, like I mentioned, on a specific section of how we kind of ended up into the latest draft, right? And I'll just add the version control, right, is a big piece of that, being able to, as those changes are made, load in new versions of the document, make sure you're working on the latest and greatest one, because I think we've all faced the frustration where you're putting in work on a certain contract, right, and you realize, oh, that's not the latest version, or somebody comes back later with additional questions, right, or additional portions of a review, and you feel like you're kind of starting over again. So again, just really a time save of being able to communicate within the system and make sure you're tracking the latest, greatest version with the latest reviews and comments.
Great. Another question we got is, how do you handle the requests and intake for contracts? For example, do employees email you and then you upload the contract to the system, or do you have a more efficient model to handle the initial request? I guess I'll go first. For us, and in the way our CLM works, is it really depends on whether it's third-party paper or not. If I know as a legal team, personally, if it's we're dealing with a client, we'll usually accept their NDA, whereas to work off of, to redline. But if we're the customer, we expect to use our own. And so that's the first question. And so if it's a third-party paper, the person receiving it, here it would probably be on the sales team. They will upload it to Finalize as a third-party NDA, master, whatever it is, and then tag me, and then I will then get an email notification saying, at Brittany Wayne, please see attached, and I'll be able to see what kind of contract it is, and that person uploading it will select from a drop-down menu what kind of contract it is, and that part's important because later on, when I'm using our dashboard to track how many MSAs did I do this month, how many third-party NDAs did I do this month or week or year, it'll help me track that, which is really key. How about you, Chris? How does the process work for you for requests and intake?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So how it used to work, right, I can tell you is that somebody used to kind of just email a proposal, a quote, maybe like you said, even the vendor's paper, whatever it may be, to a contracts at magenta email, right, .com. It would come in, and that's kind of all you would get is an attachment saying, hey, can you review this? Now everything goes through the system, right? So now we have a contract intake form where we ask key questions, for example, like I think you mentioned, potentially being able to automate something in the future. It's something we looked at, but will there be any PHI, for example, transferred under this agreement? And then you need some exhibit, right, that talks about personal data protection or GDPR, for example. So we'll ask those key questions. So I'll get all of that up front, and then I'm able to review those questions and kind of provide strategic guidance on whether we should work off a third-party paper, whether we have a template that we should push, and then also key clauses, right, that need to be included based on that intake form. So that all happens within the system now. I get a notification that a request has been submitted. I've built out a questionnaire of kind of key questions that we like to ask, and you can do the if no, yes, right? If there's no, then you move on, but if it's a yes, right, then there could be additional drill down questions to get more details. And so that's how we've been able to kind of automate it, right? I used to have to reach back and say, follow up with all these questions and try to get more details around the request before we started negotiating. Or like you mentioned, it's already the negotiations kind of already begun between the stakeholder and the third party, and so you're kind of playing catch up in terms of what template you're using, et cetera. So we've completely automated that intake process.
That's an excellent point. And even based on those questionnaires that the drafter has asked, I'll use that information that it gives me leverage and an idea of how much or how little I should be negotiating based on, like you said, PHI. If there's going to be a bunch of PHI disclosed, then you're going to want to go through the DPA, or if you don't have one, ask for one. You'll be at the person answering the questions will normally ask if we're the processor or controller. It just saves so much time when I'm opening my laptop, seeing what's in the queue. It's really all there. So another question, what type of hiccups do you encounter when collecting signatures from external partners and vendors? What a great question. Chris, do you want to handle this one first?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the signature piece is probably something we're still trying to improve. Sometimes third parties don't want to sign something that comes through an external system, right, through the CLM system. So they have their own signature process, in which case they download it, they go out and sign, and they do it. I think we like to always kind of be the last party to sign, right, after everything's approved. Sometimes certain vendors, right, or third parties, they insist on us signing first. So we kind of have a way within the system to hold back and make sure we have all the right approvals before we sign, and then make sure we get the fully executed copy back from the third party. So, I think every company, and I'm sure every life sciences company, on this call has their own signature process and their own ways they like to do things. I think what we've realized, is that being a smaller company, right, we've got to be nimble and flexible to be able to kind of move the business forward. So, within the tool, we're able to adapt to other processes as needed, and then we can document on, for example, why we're signing first in this case, right? We're working with a large, right, third party that has a particular process, and where it's in their process currently for signature, and then we'll follow up with next steps. So yeah, but it's different, right, for depending on what you're working on.
Yeah, exactly. I'd have the same answer, and I'll add that depending on the party's the counterparty's signature process, sometimes it'll get signed outside of the systems we use, which I think most companies will use DocuSign or Adobe. LeanSquares has their own signature tool as well. So whichever tool it is, if it gets signed outside of that, sometimes I'll get the signed copy just an email, which is outside of the CLM platform. But then I just upload it within that workflow. It'll go from, if it started out as red lines to clean to out for signature. And then if it got signed within whichever integration you use, DocuSign or otherwise, it'll be uploaded automatically. But if it got signed outside of that, I will manually upload it, but it's really just as simple as dragging and dropping into the platform. So let's see, do you have any advice on how to get buy-in from key stakeholders when purchasing a CLM solution? Well, I'll say what I wish I had when in multiple past companies, and what a colleague of mine is actually going through right now at where she works. It's so funny because she wants to show her the CFO at where she works the value add that the CLM would bring. But in order to really show that, she would need the dashboard to show exactly how much work she's doing. So it's kind of a catch-22. I think I entered the wrong screen. So how else to get buy-in from key stakeholders? I think doing demos, I would say, and using your own paper and contracts when doing the demo with the different CLMs. That's something I think can be really helpful to really test the tool using your own papers. So sign that NDA, send your contracts over, and really see the CLM in action. Chris, is there anything, when you were going through the process of narrowing down different CLM vendors, how did you convince, and not even who you picked, but how did you convince the other stakeholders that you needed a CLM?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece was really, streamline the drafting and review process, right, to expedite cycle times on our contracts, and that's something that the tool can actually track, right, is how long from initiation to signature, right, the contract takes. And so when I was looking for support to get this system, I said this will basically make things faster, right, as well as, like I said, when we have kind of key projects, be able to help us answer these questions faster that the business may have, or to meet the, to meet needs of various deadlines. And so being able to kind of demonstrate that through demos, building the business case, like I said, around time savings, cost savings, calling out the pain points, right, that we were feeling of tracking things manually, showing actually renewals that were missed, right, and cost that was incurred of something we wanted to cancel, for example, that then got renewed. We were able to make the business case pretty easily for why this was important. I think most stakeholders, right, they want their, like you said, legal black hole. They want their contract done yesterday, especially in the life sciences field, right? We're moving so quickly. So being able to really, streamline the process and reduce cycle time was key.
Great. Let me see if there's, I think that's it. Thank you so much. I think that looks like all the questions. This was so informative and so insightful. So thank you so much. Again, oh, actually, did we get one more question? Oh, one question just came in. How has the metadata quality management been in terms of the time spent? When you upload a final version and submit it into the repository, do you have to ensure fields like termination date and so forth are populated correctly by the AI before you do the final approval? So if I'm understanding the question correctly, so for, at least it depends on the CLM you're using. If the CLM you're using has AI, then you don't have to worry about manually entering in that termination date beforehand. There's always the option to, when going through at least what we call smart summary, where you can pull up either a report of all of your contracts and which ones have this termination date that you want to look for, or range, or if you want to look in a particular contract, you can confirm whether or not that's accurate or not. And most of the time it's going to be accurate, but if it's not, you can always train it to tell it what the mistake was and train it to do better in the future. But that's all I can think of. I guess the short answer is if your CLM uses AI, you don't have to manually enter it.
Right. Yeah, I think just to kind of follow up on what I was saying earlier, right? The technology now is pretty unbelievable. I think I've heard things like 99% accurate, right, or even more than that. So, you know, it depends on the quality, right, of the contract, which is if it was submitted through the system originally, it's going to be fine, right, in terms of your metadata. If it wasn't, the system's able to recognize it. But then the good thing, like for me as a final kind of reviewer and approver, I always have a chance, like you said, to look at the smart summary and to verify that everything's accurate. But you know, I would say I haven't encountered anything that wasn't accurate so far. So it's been just a quick check, and then you know, finally click that approval to make sure that it loads into the system correctly.
Great. Well, Chris, again, thank you so much. I loved learning more about how Magenta Therapeutics uses CLM, and I'd like to thank everyone in attendance. This was really great. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. Should I enter my email here? I'll add my email here to the group if anyone has any questions or wants one of our teams to reach out, whether you're a current client or otherwise. There's my email, and just thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.